Everyone was already seated when my father stood up and read my bank balance out loud. The room went quiet, then laughter followed. He asked how I dared hide 14.6 million from family. My mother nodded like it was obvious. Aunts watched. Cousins stared. No one stopped him. I didn't explain. I didn't deny it. I folded my hands and waited while they spoke over me, deciding what I owed. When he asked if I had anything to say, I looked at him and smiled. I asked one question. The one they never expected. It changed the room. The silence after my question didn't last long. My father recovered first. He laughed in a way that was meant to shrink me back into my chair. He said I was being dramatic. He said money changes people. My mother reached for her water glass and said nothing at all. That was her role. She let him lead and pretended neutrality was kindness. What hurt wasn't the accusation. It was how quickly they felt entitled to an explanation. I had never asked them for help. Not once. When I was struggling, I learned early not to bring problems home. Problems were treated like disobedience. Independence was praised until it produced something they could claim. My father asked where the money came from. He already knew the answer. Years earlier, he'd told me not to waste time on ideas. He said steady jobs were for people like me. When I left anyway, he called it rebellion. When I didn't come back, he called it pride. Now he called it betrayal. My aunt finally spoke. She said families don't keep secrets. She said transparency is respect. I looked around the table and realized something simple. Transparency only flowed upward. Children were expected to disclose. Parents were exempt. That had always been the rule. The conversation moved on without me. They discussed what should happen next. My father said we'd sit down with an advisor. My mother said it would be irresponsible not to plan together. Someone joked about early retirement. Someone else asked if I was still renting. I didn't answer. I watched how easily they skipped over years of distance. Years of silence. Years where no one asked how I was doing or where I was sleeping. Authority, I learned, doesn't need permission. It assumes. Later that night, my father knocked on the door of the room I was staying in. He didn't apologize. He said I'd embarrassed him. He said people were talking. He said if I wanted peace, I'd cooperate. He framed it as advice. It felt like a warning. I asked him if he remembered the winter he told me to pack my things. He waved his hand like it was a misunderstanding. He said I was difficult back then. He said parents make mistakes. He said this was different. It wasn't. The same pattern was playing out with better furniture. The next morning, my mother slid a note under the door. She asked me to come downstairs and talk. I didn't go. I emailed my attorney instead and asked for a summary of my current exposure. He replied with bullet points. Clear. Calm. No emotion. By noon, my father had called 3 times. Each message grew sharper. He said we were family. He said I was being selfish. He said legal people poison relationships. He said if I loved them, I'd trust them. Trust, I realized, was always defined as compliance. At lunch, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. My father said we needed leverage. My mother said to be careful with words. She said not to push too hard yet. I wrote down what I heard. I didn't know why. It just felt important to remember the order of things. That afternoon, my father sent an email copying relatives I barely knew. He wrote that I was confused and needed guidance. He suggested a family meeting with professionals present. The language was polished. Concerned. Public. I forwarded the email to my attorney and asked a single question. He replied an hour later. His tone shifted. He said we should slow everything down. He said not to attend any meetings. He said to preserve all communication. That was the first time someone with authority chose caution over convenience for my sake. I closed my laptop and sat by the window. I felt something loosen. Not relief. Recognition. This wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about control wearing a softer voice. Once I stepped back, the pattern sharpened. It wasn't new. It had been there since I was a teenager, just quieter then. My parents decided what I needed before asking what I wanted. When I resisted, they called it attitude. When I complied, they called it maturity. The label changed. The outcome didn't. I remembered the first time money came up between us. I was 22 and working 2 jobs. I had asked for nothing. My father found out I'd opened a savings account and demanded to know why he wasn't listed. He said families don't separate resources. When I pointed out that he and my mother had never added my name to anything of theirs, he said that was different. Parents protect. Children owe. That sentence followed me for years. When I moved out, he framed it as abandonment. When I stopped calling daily, my mother said I was drifting. When I succeeded quietly, they said I was secretive. Each step toward independence was rewritten as a flaw. At the table, when my balance was read aloud, no one asked how it felt to have private information exposed. They asked why I hadn't shared it sooner. The violation wasn't the problem. The timing was. I thought back to the night I was told to leave. It wasn't dramatic. My father stood in the doorway and said I'd made things difficult. He said space would teach me humility. My mother packed a bag for me without looking at my face. I slept on a friend's couch and learned how quickly family love can turn conditional. Years later, when I paid my own way through everything, they praised my resilience in public and criticized my distance in private. They wanted the story without the cost. As an adult, I watched them repeat the same structure with other relatives. Offers came with expectations. Help came with strings. When people pushed back, they were labeled ungrateful. When people complied, they were managed. I had seen this movie. I just hadn't realized I was still in it. After the email my father sent, relatives began reaching out. Some asked gentle questions. Others offered unsolicited advice. One cousin said I should just keep the peace. An aunt wrote that parents worry and I should be patient. No one asked what I wanted. They asked what would make things easier for everyone else. I stopped responding. Instead, I organized. I pulled bank statements, trust documents, old emails. I created a timeline. Not to build a case against them. To see myself clearly. The pattern wasn't emotional. It was procedural. Authority was asserted. Dissent was reframed as instability. Pressure increased. Public opinion was curated. My attorney called and said my parents had reached out to his office. He said they asked about options. He said they sounded confident. He said he told them nothing. That night, my mother texted me. She wrote that I was hurting my father. She wrote that he hadn't slept. She wrote that money had poisoned me. I stared at the message and felt nothing. The language was familiar. Pain was always redirected. Responsibility always moved away from them. I didn't reply. A week later, a family meeting was scheduled without my consent. I received an invite with a time and location. Professionals were listed. My name was on the agenda. I forwarded it to my attorney. He wrote back immediately. He said do not attend. He said attendance could be interpreted as consent. That was the moment I understood something quietly devastating. They weren't confused. They were escalating. The boundary crossing came disguised as concern. A courier delivered documents to the house one morning with a return address I recognized. Inside was a draft agreement titled Family Asset Alignment. It proposed a review of my accounts, temporary joint oversight, and a restriction on transfers without mutual consent. My father's name was typed under Primary Coordinator. My mother's signature line was blank, waiting. I read it twice. There was no apology in the language. No acknowledgement of the dinner. No mention of privacy. It framed the arrangement as protection. It cited risk. It suggested urgency. The cover email said they were worried about my judgment. It said delays could cause harm. It asked me to sign before the end of the week. I didn't respond. That afternoon, my father left a voicemail. He said I was being stubborn. He said he was trying to save me from myself. He said he'd already spoken to professionals and this was the responsible path. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd have to consider other options. He didn't say what they were. He didn't need to. I forwarded everything to my attorney and asked if the agreement had any standing. He replied with one word. No. Then a longer explanation. Then a recommendation to document the pressure. That night, my mother called. She spoke softly. She said my father was under stress. She said I could make it easier. She said families share burdens. She said I was making things legal when they didn't need to be. I told her I needed time. It was the first boundary I stated out loud. She went quiet, then said she didn't understand who I had become. The next day, I learned what other options meant. A financial institution flagged my account for review after receiving an inquiry claiming concern for my capacity. The inquiry did not name my father. It didn't have to. The timing was enough. I didn't panic. I called the institution and asked for the basis of the inquiry. They cited a third-party report and said they were obligated to pause certain actions. I asked for documentation. They said they'd send it. When it arrived, the language was careful. It questioned decision-making. It referenced family reports. It asked for verification. I sent my attorney the notice. He requested the source of the report. He asked for the intake record and the timestamps. He copied compliance. Within hours, the tone changed. The institution acknowledged the inquiry came from a relative. They said the report lacked substantiation. They lifted the pause. I sat at the kitchen table and felt the last thread break. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was an attempt to move me legally. Quietly. Quickly. I didn't call my parents. I didn't confront them. I didn't ask why. I stopped hoping for recognition. I stopped bargaining for peace. Instead, I took practical steps. I separated accounts. I updated beneficiaries. I limited access. I changed contact preferences. I instructed my attorney to route all communication through his office. My father sent another email. He said I was overreacting. He said the review was for my safety. He said I was forcing his hand. He said families don't do this to each other. I archived the message. A week later, a mediator reached out on their behalf. She proposed a conversation. I declined. My attorney replied with a single sentence requesting no further contact outside counsel. That was the end of it. Not emotionally. Structurally. I slept better. I ate regularly. The noise faded. The urge to explain dissolved. I realized I had been asking for permission my entire life. I didn't need it anymore. After the channels closed, things slowed down the way systems do when pressure is removed. There were no more late calls. No surprise emails. No meetings scheduled without me. My attorney confirmed that all inquiries had stopped. The compliance notes were finalized and sealed. The bank restored normal access and sent a brief apology that didn't try to explain itself. My parents tried once more, indirectly. A family friend called to say everyone was worried. I thanked her and said I was fine. She asked if I would come by to clear the air. I said no. I didn't offer a reason. She didn't press. That was the last message that reached me. Months passed. I changed nothing dramatic. I kept my routines. I showed up to work. I paid my bills. I walked in the evenings and noticed how ordinary the street looked when no one was watching me for cues. Quiet has a texture. I hadn't known it before. The estate matters resolved without incident. Documents arrived, were reviewed, were signed. Nothing required emotion. Everything required accuracy. I followed the instructions and sent them back. The process ended with a letter confirming closure. I filed it and moved on. I didn't announce boundaries. I lived inside them. When holidays came, I made simple plans. I cooked for myself or met friends. I turned my phone off early. I didn't wait for invitations that would ask me to shrink. I didn't miss them. Once, my mother sent a message that read like an apology but stopped short of responsibility. She said she hoped time would heal things. I read it, saved it, and did not reply. Healing wasn't a group project anymore. What surprised me most was the absence of drama after withdrawal. No retaliation. No public smear. No final showdown. Authority loses its voice when there's no audience. Control needs participation. I had stepped out. I took practical steps to keep it that way. I updated records annually. I kept one folder with summaries and dates. I trusted systems that required proof. I trusted myself to remain quiet when silence was safer than truth spoken to the wrong people. Sometimes I thought about the dinner table, the laughter, the way my balance was treated like a confession. The memory no longer burned. It felt flat, like a document read after the case is closed. Useful for reference. Not for feeling. I learned something specific, not inspirational. Power often looks like concern. It sounds like advice. It frames urgency as care. The difference is visible in the paper trail. The timestamps. The attempts to move you without asking. I didn't correct the story people told about me. I didn't need to. Systems had already recorded what mattered. My life didn't require their agreement. On an ordinary morning, I boxed the last of the correspondence and labeled it by year. I placed it on a shelf I rarely use. The house felt lighter without decisions waiting to be made for me. I don't describe what happened as victory. It was alignment. Things fell into places they should have occupied from the beginning. Distance where there had been intrusion. Order where there had been noise. I live inside that now. Quiet. Unclaimed. Clear.